everybody, and welcome to this exclusive conversation with VR expert, founder, and CEO of Noda, Brian Eppert. My name is Ursula Jabres, and I'm the Global Director of Customer Growth for Meta Reality Labs team. And I'll be putting the big questions to Brian in just a moment. But before I begin, I just want to take a couple moments to talk about why we're here. In the last 18 months, there's been a lot of hype about the metaverse, and especially about what it might mean for the future of work. But all of this talk about the future misses an important fact, because there's already a technology that is changing the way businesses work today. And that technology is virtual reality. Virtual reality is having a huge impact on the way companies approach meetings and collaboration, helping teams feel more connected to each other, even if they can't be physically present in the same room or in the same country. Brian is a perfect person to tell us more about this. So let's get into it. Welcome, Brian. So nice to have you in person.
Thank you, Ursula.
For this interview.
It's a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got started into VR.
Sure. I was born in Philadelphia and grew up outside the city. Yeah. My dad had been an electrician before he started designing larger scale climate control for Philadelphia Art Museum, actually. And we always had gear around the house. Oscilloscopes and soldering irons and PCs and modems and video game consoles, which I loved.
Yes.
But I also loved comic books and choose your own adventures, and I was always really about imagination and technology, and it's kind of been the same ever since.
I love that.
I remember I was about 9 years old one summer day in my friend's house, and sitting in the living room, and we watched Tron.
Yes.
And it was the first time after all the stories I'd read that I could picture that people can inhabit a digital reality. And that really stuck with me, as well as the dashing young programmers, including Jeff Bridges.
Exactly.
Yeah, and who are, making world-changing events with their code. And I think my path was kind of laid down.
I love it.
Yeah, and I did go on to study computer science and worked in the industry in enterprise IT as a coder and a software architect and team lead. And I worked with all the modern tools, but I always kind of felt like I wanted to relate to the technology differently.
Yeah.
I'm a spatial thinker, and it was hard to squeeze my ideas into a rectangle, a flat one. And I was looking for something else, and I was also a gamer, and I thought about using the 3D technology from games and using that for information and data knowledge, knowledge management.
The artist in you started making those connections. Yeah.
I tried, and so I used a little tool to create something like that, but pardon the pun, it fell flat.
Yeah.
It was on a flat screen. It was on a monitor, and actually was worse than 2D tools because there's just a little bit of translation to do and finicky controls. So I put it down for a while, and then around 2015, I think it was, the Oculus Kickstarters came out. I tried VR for the first time at a hackathon.
And how was that experience?
Well, it's funny, you don't forget the first time that you used VR. It's something everyone remembers, where you were, who showed it to you, what you saw, and I don't think about that when it comes to mobile phone or computer.
That's right.
But I do with this, so there's something special about it. And what I realized was that this was what I was going to be doing, and that not only is it possible to inhabit a 3D digital reality, but that it's actually the right way to use 3D to explore information. Because so much of what you have to do to operate that is natural. It's something you've done since you were born. To rotate, you just turn your head. To zoom, you get closer to something, or make it bigger by stretching it apart. So I thought there was real potential there, and I started working on it. From the hackathon, worked with a couple people who came from gaming and 3D design, and we worked together on a couple of projects, and everyone went their own way in the industry, and I started working on Noda about 2017.
That's incredible. What were you experiencing in that headset when you went to the hackathon? What was the problem? What game were you looking into?
Well, there was the first demo from Oculus was
Yeah.
was a Tuscany environment. So
Oh.
that was one of the first things. The other was just a desk. I think there was like the default camera setup mode,
Yeah.
and it was a desk with a plant, and you could move around, and you felt like you were somewhere else.
That's amazing.
So that's what did it, and Noda has just sort of gone from there. It was what I wanted
Yeah.
all that time, to be able to arrange ideas in 3D space, and started exploring that right away. And
I love it.
mhm.
I mean, the technology eventually caught up to your vision.
I guess so. Yeah, I was thinking ahead.
Yeah. This is great. A great story. Tell us a little bit more about Noda and the product that you're bringing to the market to help businesses and what problems you're trying to solve. Because I know it's not just for businesses. As I was looking into it, I saw a lot of personal productivity benefits as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that as well.
Oh, sure. Well, the main problems that we're trying to solve they come from the increasing amount of complexity, the accelerating pace of change,
Yeah.
and just a timeless problem of getting people together on a
Yeah.
shared vision that come from all different backgrounds and perspectives and specializations. So the way that we do that is through allowing people to express their ideas in 3D space. So imagine a whiteboard that not only expands out in 2 dimensions, but that becomes the whole space.
I need that in my life.
It really
love
helps. It really helps
Yes.
to have a space to express yourself and to put your ideas in place. I mean, we have all these metaphors of putting the pieces together, and it really feels like that's what you're doing.
I love it.
So the businesses that we help are usually involved in some kind of creative endeavor,
Okay.
or the parts of the business that are, and we work together with those businesses and support their activities, things like brainstorming, project planning, retrospectives. So anything where people are usually at a whiteboard, where it would benefit to be in the same space, that's kind of where we come in.
I love it. I'm just thinking of a real life scenario where we're doing a lot of that brainstorming. And I find that oftentimes is the more extroverted people that would contribute and get up and start drawing on the board. And it feels like in your environment, it allows for introverted and extroverted people to have more of an equal playing field in contribution. Do you find that's the case?
That is a great point. Yeah. One limiting factor of a whiteboard is that there's only so much space in front of it.
Right.
And same with a piece of paper.
And so many markers are working.
Yeah, right. So you got to find one of those, and it usually is the person who's maybe the most ambitious or energetic or closest to the screen.
That's true.
Who gets there first. And that's just not the case. When you're in a collaborative shared Noda workspace, everyone has two control, their hands are both active. It works for our app because of the nature of it. It's not an artistic kind of process, so you don't need to use your dominant hand. You can use either. So you're able to work with all your tools.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Everyone can work at the same time together. So there's no turn taking necessarily.
Oh, that's excellent. And there's no feeling of being interrupted because it's by design that everybody can work in parallel.
Yeah, continuously or apart, and then bring things together.
That's great. So let's bring that into some practical examples. If you could share some customer stories where they've used your tool and they've seen some business benefit. If you can share some of those, that would be great.
Oh, sure. Well, we get users from across all different industries because mapping out concepts and making plans is something that's pretty universal. And like you said, there's a lot of people using Noda for personal growth and for education, teaching and learning. And we get contacted all the time from people who say that they've discovered hidden insights and unlocked things that they hadn't seen before. And that's great. But large enterprises deal with complexity on a whole different scale. And that's, I think, where we can really provide a big benefit. And PwC is using Noda for mind mapping, brainstorming in the product management perspective. And it's amazing to see, you can draw out their process
Yeah.
in a Noda map and actually step someone through it step by step, walk through, and expose those elements piece by piece, because you can collapse and expand branches of nodes in Noda. So you can hide a lot of that complexity and get an overall view, and then progressively expose parts of your map to someone for the first time, and they won't be overwhelmed.
That's amazing.
Then by the end, the whole thing's out there, and you're just swimming in it. You're walking around in this space.
Wow. That's amazing. And I'm imagining that the tools used in VR can also be available in 2D for folks that, want to follow up in some of the action items from that discussion.
Yeah, you can take things out. That's one of the
Yeah.
lessons we learned early on. You have to be able to take what you've done in VR, and it got to be actionable in the real world. So we've definitely addressed that in our work and found it to be a true feature, especially when you're doing things with enterprises that are maybe mostly not all converted over to spatial yet. So there's going to be this period of transition and hybrid when it comes to 3D and 2D, where we need to be able to access from both ways.
And have companies like PwC shared with you some of the ROI impact that they've seen from simplifying that really complex process, and also probably sometimes expensive process that they go through with your tool?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the main benefits is that it cuts down on potential travel.
Yeah.
So there are cases where it would be better to be in person, but it's just not economically viable. These brainstorming sessions especially.
Yeah.
But the virtual presence that you get from Noda and VR in general, it does provide a lot of the benefit of that without the inconvenience and the cost.
Right.
Bluefruit Software in the UK is an embedded systems provider, software provider, and they're using Noda for retrospectives, code reviews, which is near and dear to my heart as a person who's developed a lot of software. So that's a big benefit, is that you can have people who aren't in the same place together and working on ideas and improving functions and looking back and fixing things that went wrong and going forward and being more correct. The company called Matang is down in Arizona. They do data governance solutions integration, and they work with big customers in the healthcare and the entertainment, Major League Sports, including the Maple Leafs. And they're using Noda. I love it. Every new person who works there gets a Quest headset and a copy of Noda.
Oh, that's great.
And they use it to conduct strategy sessions to plan their business growth. And they walked me through a room once. I was astounded. It was their KPIs from the company, from the top level down to the individual metric. And it was laid out in this 4-story virtual space, like this cascading sort of weeping willow tree.
And beautiful.
Yeah, it was great fun to explore. You can basically be free of some limits in that environment, because you can just sort of climb your way up there.
Oh my God!
And
then, talk about making KPIs fun.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you're sort of climbing your way up the tree and then scooting back down.
That's great. And I want to go back into the idea that company is giving every employee a headset and a copy of Noda, because let's go a little bit on the example of the personal productivity. You've mentioned how for business you've seen them use more around teams and collaboration. How would somebody use Noda for personal productivity?
Well, when it comes to that, it's usually something that someone cares a lot about.
Yeah.
There may be some friction to get into a headset and start something new, so I think it's usually something people have a motivation to want to get to the bottom of. So it's usually something important, like it's their career path, where they want to go to school, decision making about their life,
right?
Or for personal growth in terms of what am I going to do in this next phase, and what are the pieces I want to bring in. So we do have a lot of features to allow you to bring in content from the web. So you bring in images, kind of like a mood board, and set the stage for your next step of your journey. And that seems to be in the personal productivity space. It's around life planning and there's actually another interesting way people are using it for almost like a memory and family ancestry sort of
Oh,
view.
interesting.
So people will set up something about the family or an event,
Mm-hmm.
take a bunch of pictures and put them in the space that will help them kind of recreate or revisit that with their family or by themselves.
Oh, that's wonderful. I can see that because often, for example, at Meta, we have this practice where at the beginning of the year, we like to encourage people to do vision writing or vision boarding. And I found the years that I actually actively did that, but we would use a bunch of magazines and start cutting them out and put them into a cardboard.
Yeah.
I can see Noda being a great tool for individuals to do a vision board for their intentions at work that year, and then how do that translate to the strategy for the team or for the company, right? And then perhaps share each other's vision board in a meeting.
Yeah, you can do that. You can combine things together, and I guess the nice thing there is that you can take it with you. So
yes,
if you're on the road or something, you can always revisit that place.
I wonder because you have your headset. It's your office.
Exactly.
Excellent. So as we're wrapping up some of this really interesting interview, there is a couple of questions that I want to ask. Given your experience both in the technology field, but also in bringing VR to solve problems, both for people and for businesses, what would be some of the insights that you'd like to share with some of the business leaders that are watching the program?
Well, the first is that you are already operating a spatial business.
Yeah.
And your employees are spatial beings who have spatial thoughts, and a lot of the content is also spatial.
Yeah.
But in the conversion into 2D tools, you're losing something there and back again when people have to bring that back out and think about it. So using immersive tools and something like Noda helps you to preserve the original intention and inspiration that people have. And in using it throughout the process, it sort of builds on itself, so that you're getting this like daisy chain of innovation without losing things on that reduction to 2D. So I would say that the best way to get started is to use these tools for an immediate need.
Yeah.
And most organizations do some kind of goal setting or brainstorming or retrospectives, and these are great places to use this technology and try it out. There's probably people in the organization who already are interested in exploring this, and that would be a great place to start as well.
How would you find those people? Let's say, because oftentimes we have folks within a company that are interested to bringing projects like this to leadership. What would be an advice you could give them in terms of finding other people, like-minded people who have the same interests, or to build a business case for the leadership that may or may not be quite convinced that this is a path to go?
Well, having it around will draw the people that are interested.
Yeah.
So having a headset, trying it out, showing people. One thing we do try to adapt for is getting the content out of VR. And you can create something in Noda and then share that with people, and they can view it on a web page.
Okay.
So that's a great way to bring the conversation around and to show what's possible. It's not the same, it doesn't have the same expressive feeling, and you can't feel it spatially, but it does show that there's something deeper here that you can accomplish, and it does draw the interest of most people who would be otherwise interested.
Right. So I like that you are also encouraging them to try it out as much as like seeing the evidence of the output of the work.
Yeah.
What other insights would you share to the leaders that are listening in?
Well, there's a couple things that have come up in the course of developing Noda and seeing it used in all of these different use cases. One is the one that we're mentioning about there's this hybrid world. There's going to be a transitionary period, and you're going to see a coexistence of 2D and 3D. So managing the bridge between those, I think, is something to consider. We have a couple things that have worked for our use cases and our users, like the web export, but also like CSV files for data tables
Oh,
and
yeah.
PNG files for image assets, and those move easily back and forth. But in some cases, those are still flat files. That there's some things you wouldn't want to do that way. So when it comes to gaps between new technology and old technology, I think you want to look for something that can adapt and can be customized. So we learned that early on. People would ask us to connect to their own data sources with Noda.
Right.
So we build an integration API, so you can actually use the tools that people already have at these organizations, like HTML and JavaScript and CSS. And you can build a custom integration with Noda to anything. So you can connect it to an existing system, large-scale graph database, or IT for HR, or Salesforce even. And well, those would be custom built and at this point. But you can do that as well as your own custom apps internal.
Right.
So not to connect to existing systems, but just something that helps in your workflow that's really specific to your case. So I would say that these technologies, like all of the technologies we're used to, they work best when they can be suited to exactly the needs of the business.
That's great, because it really speaks to leveraging the current investment and just enhancing the experience for the team that is trying to make that brainstorm or plan that. I'm thinking when you said Salesforce immediately is like for account planning or strategies around territories, or even looking at forecasts and how the business is doing. All of those things are quite spatial, but it does require bringing some of the data in to visualize the journey of a customer, for example, and how all those pieces play together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no limit to what kinds of things can be enhanced by displaying them spatially.
Yeah. I love it. Okay, so the last question. This is the fun question, because you can't get it wrong. And I know we talked about it. It's like, let your imagination fly. Where do you think VR for work is going to be in the next 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years?
Well, I think I'm going to work backwards.
Yeah, I like that.
So I think in 10 years that this technology will be ubiquitous. I think it'll be the way that most people interface with their digital lives. So head-worn devices of some kind, I think, and immersive interfaces will be how people operate what they do now in the future. So I think in that world, most enterprises will have a presence that is spatial, and it will probably just be an extension of the existing internet, and that will kind of unfold, I think, pretty naturally. But other things that may happen around that time, I think, are that what would currently be done in a retail space, some of the biggest companies can accommodate retail space that's only set up for a showroom and a customer service function, and I think that will be available to many more businesses, because it'll be a spatial environment people can go to interact with that brand or that business. So I think that'll be common. That'll probably be the larger traffic volume for most businesses. There are all kinds of interesting things, I think, on the way in 10 years that I think will kind of change the picture. So the type of device may be different than it is now. I think the interfaces could be different. But in general, it will be an immersive thing. And to pull it back 2 years and 5 years, I think it's just going to be stages of that progression. I think in 2 years, some businesses will have a spatial presence and will be conducting operations that way. And some people, will use these devices as their main interface. They won't mostly use anything else. And 5 years more. And then forward. So
I love it. The sky's the limit. And I like the idea of, as you mentioned earlier, right? You being inspired by science fiction. And I find science fiction, and we did talk before about some of the movies like Ready Player One. Who knew? Like, now it's something that we could take for granted, because not only is something that can happen today, but it will be completely different in 5 to 10 years. And the interfaces and the devices will look completely different. potentially much smaller, much lighter, even more ergonomic, right? Parts of our body as well.
Yeah, I know. And it's been interesting to see the wave so far to where we are, because I think I picture it like in the very first instance, it was these inventors and these philosophers almost and tinkerers who started out in the smallest circle working on these things, and then it sort of went out and collected more early adopters, and then and every wave it sort of expands and then contracts a little bit. And I think we're in a really interesting wave now where it's way more accessible to people who pick it up today. I mean, this will probably always be the case, but if you start today, you gain all the advantages of all that hard work without the pain that some people had to pay to wear the heavy headsets and work with buggy software. So I think it's in a great place today, and I think it's well established that this is the trend. I think it's clear.
That's right. And that's you've touched on a really good point, because oftentimes some leaders may have or retain a perception that this is a very complex project to deploy, or perhaps costly and not necessarily evident for them to see the ROI, versus where it's at today versus in the past. So what would be some of the advice you would give leaders on that front in terms of debunking some of that myth?
Well, these are affordable devices, and the software is affordable as well. So it's not expensive to try in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think it makes total. If the trend is established, there's really no reason to wait to try to explore what gains can be had from it. So starting now is a good idea. There are limitations, of course. You mentioned some of the things that come with ergonomics, and I think what we've seen is that there are some concerns that people have before they get started that are non-issues, and on first contact they sort of dissolve. There are other things that are real concerns and that the industry needs to solve or has solved already, and some of those are around comfort and safety. So those are important, especially in an enterprise environment or workplace environment, of course. And when it comes to comfort, I think one sort of myth or concern that people have is that a wearable device, just the idea of a headset wearable device is a barrier. But we haven't found that to be true at all. I think it's something that people who haven't tried it yet are concerned about. But once they see the value, once they try it a few times, it's like no one sees a scuba diver and thinks like, oh, that's going to mess up their hair.
Right.
you know.
That's a great example.
As a person who would do that, you know why, and there's so much reason on one side versus the other that these kind of superficial impressions just sort of like dissolve. But the other thing that is a more serious concern would be comfort in terms of sickness, like motion sickness.
Right.
And that has been a concern in the past if there's a performance issue, and there's just things that we now know that you shouldn't do that would make that happen. But those come up more when it comes to fully immersive, high-intensity games.
Yeah.
And in productivity apps, we don't really see that very much. There are well-known things that we do. We teleport instead of allowing a person to sort of scroll themselves around. Snap turns are another thing. And if you use these, then almost everyone will tolerate that experience.
That's great. That's good to know.
But another thing that helps a lot, and this is also in terms of comfort and safety, is awareness of your environment.
Yeah.
And when it comes to workplace in particular, that is a barrier that people had for a while, is that if they can't see what's happening around them, that they can't use it. And that has been addressed on the hardware side and the platform side by this pass-through AR features. So I think that is a great benefit and unlocks. I mean, we've heard from people who said, until you added pass-through AR, we couldn't use this for work, and now we can. So that was a barrier. but no longer concerned.
Exists. That's correct.
Yeah.
Wow, this is incredible. I can keep talking to you for another 2 hours, but unfortunately, time has gone quickly, and that's all the time we have for today. So a big thank you to Brian for sharing so many great insights into the impact that VR has in businesses today and where it can go into the future. And thank you and everyone who's taken the time to listen in. I hope that we've left you feeling inspired and also curious. If you want to know more about VR for work, just head over our website, forwork.meta.com, where you can check out a range of Meta Quest VR headsets, including ones with pass-through, learn more about VR solutions, or easily book a call with one of our experts. And if you want to learn more about Noda, which I highly recommend, just head out to noda.io. That's all from us. See you next time.